Second Timothy chapter 3. These first, what is it, 5 verses? Yeah, are they're kind of not hopeful, but they are incredibly realistic. And oh, by the way, they have never not applied. I'm going to read it again. We've talked about verse 1, but I'm going to include it. But mark this: there will be terrible times in the last days. People will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of good, treacherous, rash, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness but denying its power. Have nothing to do with such people. On the one hand, I'm reading this, and the first thing comes to my mind is, that sounds a lot like Twitter. Twitter is not gonna save the world. I hope Elon Musk is able to complete his purchase and do something with it that it hasn't recreate it to be something it was at the beginning, but for a long time hasn't been. But that's not going to save us. That's not going to cure our issues. But boy, golly, you just, if you're not on Twitter, I don't feel any compelling need for you to be on it. I'm on it. I look at it. I try not to look at it very long or very often because it's loaded with a lot of this kind of stuff. We talked about lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boastful, proud, abusive. I want you to think about that as almost a progression of character erosion. Okay, first of all, lovers of themselves. And it stands to reason that if you're going to be a lover of yourself, you're going to love money, because money gets you what you need in order to get you what you want. Okay, boastful, proud, abusive. It'd be hard for me to imagine that a boastful, proud person who is a lover of themselves is not eventually going to become abusive. There's a lot of ways that people abuse others. In our world, there is more physical violence in the form of abuse than we would ever want, than we would ever dream even could happen in a civilized society. But it does. I work with people who, in my clientele, who are either victims or perpetrators of many different kinds of abuse. There's verbal abuse, and there's psychological abuse, there's even spiritual abuse. But abuse, what's the point of abuse? Well, I believe that if you cut it all the way back to its root, the root of it is, I want to hurt you. That's, I think we have to be careful, because that root cause sort of thing, you don't have to be this horribly abusive, selfish, a horrible person to sometimes have to check yourself on abuse. There's a lot, as I'm recording this in Oklahoma, we're ramping up for elections, and holy smokes, they seem to be not quite, but almost back-to-back commercials. One candidate tells you how they are for you and they're against all of the abuses of power that they see in the incumbent. And then the incumbent comes on, talks about all the lies that are being told about them. It's, oh gosh. I For good reason, I believe I've become a political pessimist. I do not believe politics can solve our most significant and pressing problems. Political action can maybe mitigate some things, but it's not the answer. Don't fool yourself. Does that mean stay out of it? That's not what I'm talking about. Some people ought to be in it. They are positioned by God to be useful, even powerful, for His sake in that role. I'm not one of them. There's a lot of abuse that goes on in our government. And I don't care what side of the aisle you choose, you have to know. And one of the things, on a systemic level, there's all kinds of abuse of policy and power and bending of laws, and people are hurt every day all over our country because of abuse. And there's also this political back and forth, anyway, abusive. I got to quit doing that. I just got to quit talking about, I'm politically pessimistic, but I got opinions on everything political. So I'm going to cut that back. He goes on, disobedient to their parents. Now, this is more or less in the middle of, pretty strong words. And I'm thinking, what? You're equating disobedient to parents with boastful pride, abusive, and right beneath it, ungrateful, unholy, without love. And so you're putting disobedient to their parents. Well, okay, you probably immediately can, in your mind, you're cast back to Exodus chapter 20, whether you realize it's in Exodus chapter 20 or not. But you remember, there is one of the 10 commandments. The 10 words has to do, it says, honor your father and mother. How do you honor them? Well, one of the ways that you honor them is through obedience. But there's a point where, as an adult, you are now no longer under their authority in the same way. To honor them now means something different than it did when you were under their roof and under their authority. In a Jewish household, wow, that transition where you are no longer under the authority of your parent sometimes never happened, because families of 2 or 3 generations often live together. How do you get out from under the authority in that? Well, there's a lot of cultural and historical stuff that you have to fold into this disobedient to their parents. I really don't think Paul is talking about adults who disobey their parents. I think what he's talking about is one of the outcomes when a culture, when a person lives in this kind of way, is that their kids, why would they be obedient? Just look at the profile again. They love themselves, they love money, they're boastful, proud, abusive, they're ungrateful, unholy, without love, unforgiving, slanderous, without self-control, brutal, not lovers of the good, treacherous, rash, conceited, on it goes. That's the profile of one or both parents. Why is a kid gonna obey them. I mean, they have no moral authority. And in terms of their practical authority, the only power they have is whatever they can physically wield on their kids. And we live in a culture where it's not all this way, but there's a significant number of families that are not run by the parents, but are run by the children. And the parents don't punish and they don't discipline their children. And so why would a child be obedient to their parent? I routinely run into the fact that kids, sometimes one of the issues that young parents have today is that their kids are disrespectful and disobedient. What doorstep do I leave the body on for this whole thing? Well, it's not just one thing. It's many things. One is, okay, and I mean absolutely no disrespect to you if you're a public school teacher. I believe Christians in our public school system who are teaching and living out their values as a follower of Jesus are probably one of the few things that are keeping us afloat as a culture. But there is a educational philosophy that says children must express. And if they, you wouldn't ever punish a child. Well, for the ivory tower, this sounds like an interesting and maybe even worthy approach, but it doesn't work out in practice. And how many teachers do we all know who are up to here with kids that don't follow instructions? They're not obedient. They're disrespectful. They're resentful. Well, basically, they just mirror the values of their home and parents. And then if you're a teacher, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about, you probably know these teachers who, and this is regional. There are some regions where this will not, it's not going to work. Nobody's going to go there. But there are some regions of our country where teachers simply have no recourse. They cannot punish their students for disobedience and disrespect. They have to put up with it. I don't know how you fix this, aside from changing people's hearts. Because as long as families are rooted in the kinds of behaviors that Paul is listing out here, kids are going to be disobedient. And kids who are disobedient to their parents sometimes are at risk in terms of sociology. They are going to do at-risk behaviors because they have nobody in their life who is drawing boundaries and holding them to them. This is unfair to the kid. And it's unfair to the society at large. Well, this is a soapbox, you can tell. And I don't want to bash every educator, because I do not think every educator has this perspective. But there are people who are making decisions about education that they do hold this position. And it's got to be incredibly frustrating to authentic, genuine, good-hearted followers of Jesus in the classroom who find themselves handcuffed by policies made by people who haven't been in a classroom in a very long time and seem to not, well, whatever. Gosh, I guess I'm just in one of those moods. I'm going to shut it off now and pick it up next time on Soul Care with Stevie Boy.